Hello, welcome to this online session focusing on sustainability, and we're going to be tasting 6 really interesting wines from different bits of Spain and having a little bit of discussion about some of the sustainable wine initiatives that are taking place in Spain's vineyards at the moment. So it's really good to see you. We believe we've got 45 minutes for this session, and I promise you we won't overrun. We'll get down to it. And this is the 5th in a series of online tastings. There's another one that's taking place in June with Mr. Atkin. So Tim Atkin will be exploring Tempranillo. And then at the end of July, there's face-to-face real-life tasting. Yeah, exciting. So could we have the first slide, please? So yes, sustainable Spain. That's actually a picture of a bunch of grapes. I think that's Tempranillo. It's taken in the vineyards of Rioja. Anyway, next slide, please. Oh, I can advance to myself, I think. Yes. So let's have a little talk about sustainability. There's lots of different aspects to it. And of course, there's lots of different sustainable certification programs as well. I think the definition of sustainability that I like is one that I heard from Jeff Thorpe, who runs Riverstone nurseries in New Zealand. It's a major nursery there, and a few years ago he took his whole nursery operation totally sustainable. But what he talks about 500-year sustainability, and what he means by that is, can we keep on doing what we are doing for 500 years? And if the answer is you can't, then your sustainability certification isn't strong enough. You're not truly sustainable. We're only sustainable if we can keep on doing what we're doing without further degrading soil quality and the environmental quality and the other aspects of sustainability. And I think that's a really important definition, because there is a bit of greenwashing around when it comes to sustainable systems. It's a box ticking exercise, and you get a certificate at the end, and everyone feels good, but they're still doing things which aren't truly sustainable. And I think that there's a moral issue here, which is that we can't expect the next generation to pick up the tab for what we're doing. It's like going into a pub. I had a friend at university. He used to come into the pub with us, or go to the student union with us, and he'd never bring any money. Or just bring enough money for 1 pint, and it was £1 for a pint in those days. So bring a £1 coin and have a pint, and then obviously we've got to pay for him for the rest of the evening. And it's like it's not acceptable to expect other people to pick up your tab, and it's certainly not acceptable for us to expect the next generation to pick up the tab for things that we're doing at the moment. So I think the wine industry now is thinking very seriously about what true sustainability, this sort of 500-year sustainability, might look like. And there are many elements to consider, and as well as the obvious ones, we have the one which is financial sustainability. And basically your business has to work. If you go broke, then you can't be sustainable. So that's an obvious one. And then we have to think about the human element. Is how do we treat people who are working in the vineyards and around the vineyards and in the wine businesses? That's also an important element of sustainability. But the things we tend to think about most, we tend to think about soil health. And with soil health, the goal has to be to improve it, or at the very least, maintain it. And there's a lot of thought going into that now. There's lots of discussion around elements like no-till viticulture, or whether herbicides are acceptable or not, because a lot of sustainable systems allow herbicide use. And what's the problem with herbicide use? Well, one of the big problems is that if you don't have things actively growing in the soil, then the soil biology is massively affected. So if you use herbicides, aside from any potential health implications of herbicides, which is kind of debatable, you really are losing a lot of soil microlife by having this bare soil and nothing growing in it. And we're also thinking about carbon footprint as well. So in sustainability, there's a lot of discussion about organics and whether that's the best way forward. Well, when it comes to carbon footprint, some producers have decided that actually organics may not be the best solution, because, for instance, if you're using the fungicides that are allowed in organic systems, which is basically elemental sulfur and copper, then the copper-based products, first of all, there's an environmental impact of their use as well. Although if very little is used, then obviously the environmental impact is diminished. But generally speaking, these are contact fungicides. They're less effective than systemic fungicides, which is the more modern fungicides that work, being transmitted through the plant through its vascular system. That's why they're called systemics, and they're more effective. So if you're using a less effective fungicide and a contact fungicide, which is washed off in the rain, then your carbon footprint is going to go up because you'll be doing more passes through the vineyard in your tractor to spray. So this has to be borne in mind. There's no perfect solution for running a vineyard. And the best solution, the solution with the fewest compromises, depends on where you're farming, the climate where you're farming, and also your viticultural goals as well. Water use is another factor here. And I think water use is something, especially in Spain, which has become quite a big issue. If you've got dry grown vineyards, obviously that's a much better solution in terms of water use than having irrigation. So that's something that needs to be borne in mind. So let's think about organics and biodynamics. This has become a very important sort of poster child, I guess, or branding for farming in a more sensitive, organic, more sensitive, respectful of the soil sort of way. And interestingly, Spain is actually the world's #1 organic wine producer. In 2018, around 90,000 hectares were certified organic, which accounts for 9.3% of the vineyard area in Spain. And it also constitutes more than a quarter of the world's organic vineyards. So Spain is doing really well in this respect. Europe generally is much stronger at organics than some of the new world countries. And the thing about organics is it's a tremendously powerful brand. It's a banner under which people understand what organics means. It's quite clear. So you know that if someone's organic, they're not using any systemic fungicides, they're not using insecticides, and they're not using herbicides. So you know that, and you know that they're not using inorganic fertilizers as well. They're using compost if they want to fertilize the vineyards. So organics is kind of clear. And alongside organics, we've got biodynamics. I know there's differences, but biodynamics is pretty much organics plus. It's got extra things to it, but it's a similar principle. It's about, so someone's quite made a question. I assume these data are based on, right, so 2 questions there. Let me answer those. The data is based on certified vineyards not practicing organic. Yes, if you want to include those that are practicing organic which aren't certified, then obviously that figure would be larger, because a lot of people do farm organically but decide not to pursue certification, because certification can be expensive and it can be a real pain in the it can be a pain. And in Spain, first in both percentage of organic vineyards and organic wine production? I think the answer to that is yes, because although obviously I need to double check that. I'm pretty sure it's the case, but obviously a lot of Spain's vineyards are kind of wide spaced and lower yielding. So therefore, in terms of production, it might not be the top, but I think it is. I can double check that. And Pauline says, a bit surprised by the stats on Spain being the first organic production country. Yeah, well, those are the data. The other consumers, France and Germany may be the top consumers of organic wines, but I think maybe a lot of those are imported wines. Who can tell? It's a good question. And I think I just need to absolutely double check that. But all the data I've seen said that in terms of vineyard area, certainly Spain has the largest of certified organic vineyard area. And so organics is a really important brand. And I think this is one of the problems with sustainability, is that no one really knows what sustainable is. So you have all sorts of certification schemes, and they're really good. I think they're important. Obviously, HVE3 is the big one in France now. It's taken over from Terra Vitis. It's taken over from Lutz Raisonnet. HVE3 is the big one in France. And New Zealand has probably the biggest take up of certified sustainable with their certified sustainable scheme, reaching I believe more than 90% of all the vineyards. Because if you want to do anything with wines of New Zealand, then you have to be certified sustainable. But some people criticize the sustainability system in New Zealand and elsewhere because they're just a little bit too loose, that you just have to fill in a form. You don't actually have to change what you're doing all that much. You just have to avoid using certain products which are considered to be really unacceptable. But in some ways, I think it's really good that people are getting down to filling those forms in and looking what they're actually doing. And so this is a step forward to farming better, I think, to join one of these certified sustainable schemes. And I think there are some good scientific reasons why there may be better ways of farming vineyards in terms of looking after soil health, looking after your carbon footprint, than organics. Organics is great, but it's not perfect. And as I mentioned earlier on, you're using copper if you've got any issues with downy mildew. And it's not something you really want to put in your soils. But the problem is that we don't have any banners aside from organics that really grab people's attention, and I think that would be really useful. And there's one question: is Spain looking at regenerative agriculture? Look, I think there's pockets of regenerative agriculture occurring across most wine countries now. This is the new buzzword, basically. It's sort of thinking about the soils and regenerating the quality of the soils and farming in that sort of way. So regenerative is an exciting thing that's happening. Obviously, it's not certified, it's not defined, but it's that sort of approach, I think, is catching on more. And I think what we really need is some sort of alternative to organics, because organics is really good for a lot of people, but it's not good for everyone. So there needs to be something else that's kind of catchy, that works as a brand, that people immediately understand, means that wine grower is looking after their soils, looking after their vineyard. And it'd be interesting to see if somebody could devise this sort of thing that could be rolled out in much the same way that organics has been rolled out internationally with relatively consistent standards throughout the world. So 5 of the 6 wines we're actually going to be looking at are organic. So I think that's I think the other thing is it's like we're talking about sustainability. One element of this is financial sustainability. If we can get people to pay more for products, agricultural products that are farmed correctly, I think that would be a big step forward. As it stands at the moment, there is not a particular premium for organic wine over, and there's certainly no premium for sustainable wine over conventionally farmed wine. So that's something that could change. I think it would be really interesting if that could change. Obviously, the best way to get people to take up farming more in a more sensitive way is to show them the economics. And I think in New Zealand there was a study with 3 different producers who did this for a couple of years. They were comparing their conventional vineyards with vineyards that they started for farming organically, and there's really interesting details and all the costs, all the practices that they changed. And they looked at this, and then they looked at the output in terms of, did this make a difference to the grapes that they harvested? Because obviously, if you lose yield, for instance, then that's an expense. That's quite expensive. And I think they found out that in terms of economics, it worked out pretty favorably, because a lot of the stuff that you're using in conventional vineyards, the chemical products, are actually quite expensive. So if you're not using those, you're saving a bit of money. And ideally, if you farm well with organics, you shouldn't be needing to compromise your yield at all. And so that's the really interesting crossing of all these things, is where you get the environmental benefit plus a financial benefit, then everyone wins. So let's go to the wines. I think this would be a good point to start tasting wines. After all, that's the focus of this session. So first up, we've got the Raymat Castel Chardonnay 2019. So I've actually got the bottles here, so I can taste this as well. So Raymat, this is an organic wine. Raymat is an important producer in the Costas del Segre, and they've been growing Chardonnay for a great deal of time, actually. That they could we keep the slides on the presentation, please? Because it's got the technical details there as well, and we'll see those. So yeah, so they've been growing, I think since the 1970s, they've been growing Chardonnay here in Costa del Segre. And so this is organically produced. And I'm really interested to hear your comments on the wines as well. So please feel free to join in on the chat. And the technical sheets are in the chat there as well. So the technical sheet and importer information are in the chat that Celine's just loaded that in. And the first thing to note, the color of this is it's reasonably deeply colored. But what's interesting is that this is actually, I believe, unoaked, which is kind of interesting. So what we're looking at here is an attempt to capture the fruit quality of this Chardonnay. Oh yeah, so the bottles have a QR code on it as well. So if you want to scan that, that will bring up the information as well. I find this aromatically really interesting. It's kind of got this kind of crystalline citrus fruit note. It's spicy. It's kind of exotic, but it's also fresh, which I think is kind of cool. And I think in terms of the palate, I think there's what I appreciate about this wine is it's got the kind of layers of flavor. It's got some exotic, richer, more tropical notes, and it's got this kind of lively, frilly, slightly pithy, spicy citrus thing at the finish with a keen acidity. I think good balance. Yeah. Yes, and there's a comment there. Katrina says this pack's a punch for £11. Yeah, and that's the other thing. For 11 quid, this is actually pretty impressive. There's a lot of depth here. It's kind of not at all flabby. I think it's got some richness, but I think there's this really nice, as Karen points out, pithy finish on this. Heather says, do you know if they acidify or is this naturally quite crisp acidity? I don't know the answer to that. I'm sorry. My guess would be that there may be some acidification going on here. Yeah, that's impressive. I'm impressed with that. Maggie says, also find it very textural, lees stirring. Yeah, I think if it's fermented in tank, then you can still do lees stirring. And I know that in Rías Baixas with Albarino, they do a lot with gas. So they'll keep the wine in the tank and then they'll use gas. They'll squirt it with gas in the lees to turn the lees up in the tank to add texture to the wine. And I think this would be a way of getting this sort of textural quality, I think, yes. So let's move on to wine number 2. And this is kind of interesting for a number of reasons. And also, I know we're doing a sort of Spanish wine tasting, and I've picked the two whites I've picked are both Chardonnay, international grape varieties, when Spain does actually have obviously some fabulous indigenous white grapes. But that wasn't a deliberate choice. But actually, I think, I don't feel too bad about it because I think they're quite interesting wines. So this is an organic Chardonnay. Jean Leon, now owned by Torres. And Maria Torres is in charge of this winery. Quite an interesting backstory. It's worth Googling Jean Leon sometimes. A very interesting character. And this is organic Chardonnay from a vineyard that's planted in Penedès. It's a 5-hectare vineyard planted in 1967. So this was really one of the first times that international varieties were planted in Spain. So this 1967 planting was really, really quite interesting that this was planted then. So while this is organic, Torres, who are champions of environmental issues in Penedès, especially, you know, in Spain, they are not true believers in organics, because Miguel Torres Senior, he's explained a number of times that he's concerned about everything. So he's concerned about the carbon footprint of the vineyards as well. And they find that when they farm organically, they're going in the vineyard too often, and they're using too much fossil fuels farming their vineyards. And he thinks the best balance, and he doesn't want to put copper on the vineyards. So the best balance he finds is farming environmentally sensitively, but using systemic fungicides and, you know, the modern viticultural toolkit, but then bearing in mind soil health and everything else. But also Torres are doing some really interesting things. And one of the most interesting things they're doing is they've been exploring the use of carbon capture techniques. And I remember a couple of years ago, I went out to see a presentation about some of the methods they were using. And the one that's most promising is called Excitron. I'll put it into the box so you can, if you want to look it up, you can have a look for yourself. So Excitron is a really interesting system where you're taking the carbon dioxide from the ferments, because this is the easiest carbon dioxide to capture. You know, it's 100% carbon dioxide. And if you can capture that, then what do you do with that carbon dioxide? And the Excitron system turns it into energy. So it's a really really cool system. And this is something that wineries really should be thinking more about, because you can actually reduce your carbon footprint a great deal. And this is the easiest way to do it. The problem is the technology is reasonably expensive, and you're only fermenting grapes in your winery for 2 or 3 months a year. So you're paying a lot for the capital expense of the equipment that then doesn't get used very often. But then that's true of pretty much everything in a winery. So yeah, so Torres have really. Oh yeah, so Kevin asks, are there any studies published on the carbon footprint of organic farming practices versus non-organic? That's a great question. I suggest going to Google Scholar and typing in carbon footprint organic farming, because that, I think, would pull out any research that has taken place. I've looked for viticulture and I haven't found any yet, because it would be nice to have the data. Because as I say, farming sustainably really is, you know, you've got to choose your compromises, because there's no one perfect system. And you also have to tailor any approach to the specific, you know, conditions of your region. And I think that's the real challenge. We can't have any single recipe for this is the best way to farm. So let's talk about this wine. I looked at this one earlier, and mine was quite deep in color. And I don't know whether, yeah, mine's really deep in color. I did have a small sample as well, one of the sample bottles. So I tried that, and that was much paler in color. So I think this bottle is a little bit oxidized. But my impression of this wine is that it's a really very quite an intense, rich wine. It's really powerful. And I was Excitron ballpark figure, good question. I think, again, the best way to do that would be to Google Excitron, because I didn't see any economics in terms of the cost. And I think it's something that's still not been implemented in a winery setting commercially yet. But there's this, I mean, Torres have been looking at this for years and years. I remember visiting maybe 10 years ago, and they were looking at using the carbon dioxide from fermentations to grow algae. And then, you know, and then those algal, then harvesting the energy from the algae. But that obviously didn't work as well. The one that they've come down and said is the best system is Excitron. And I think Excitron is being used for domestic residences. It's super interesting, actually, because then if you're burning gas, for instance, you can collect the carbon dioxide, and then that's used then to turn into energy that can be reused. It's quite an interesting system. Yeah, so this wine is a very bold, rich wine. It's nutty and it's a bit peachy, some pineapple. It's got tropical characters. This is 50% barrel fermented, I believe, and the rest is in tank. I think it's a bold style. And the retail for this, I believe, is a bit more expensive. This is about £22. And again, despite the richness, there's a freshness to it as well. Very bold flavors. What do people think about this wine? Yeah, complex, intense gastronomic wine, says Katrina. Yeah, I think it is. Yeah, it's impressive. Yes, Karen says more Chardonnay. It's much more Chardonnay than the first. Yes. Yeah, it's kind of growing on me. I know this bottle I've got is a little bit oxidative, but it's still impressive. And I quite like the little bottle when I tried that earlier. That was again, it's got a couple of more years on it. It's almost 4 years old now. So if there are no more comments, let's progress to the next wine. And this is interesting because I think it's Bobal from Manchuela, and I think Bobal is a great variety that in the past was simply a workhorse, and I think that now it's people are doing interesting things with it. So this is organic Bobal, hand harvested, and it's then aged in a mixture of French oak and also terracotta amphora of Tinachas, which is, I'm fascinated by the use of alternative élevage. When I started writing about wine, everyone was like, go to a winery, you'd see like stainless steel and small oak barrels. That's pretty much it. And various, combinations of those two different formats. But now you can go even to a very large commercial cellar. You'll probably find a corner, there'll be a couple of amphora, maybe there'll be a concrete egg. I think that's really interesting that people are curious about how wines grow up, the élevage of wines outside of the just stainless steel and small oak. And I think small barrels in particular, I remember Evan Sadi said to me once, he said that, a barrel is a way of ripening a wine. That's why you use a small barrel. It's almost like you're ripening it. Good question. Is this whole bunch? I think there's some whole bunch in here. It doesn't say on the technical sheet, but it's what I think is amazing about this wine is the peppery quality. I mean, it's just full on rotundo, and it's quite ripe as well. It's not one of these sort of glue style infusion wines. There's some extraction taking place here. I really like the intersection between the freshness, the peppery quality, the brightness, the bright raspberry fruit, and then there's also almost a lushness there as well. There's some sweet fruit quality. I think it's a really interesting wine. I can't remember the price of this one. Does anyone have access to the price? $12.99. Yeah, so this is really absolutely hitting the nail on the head here. It's organic. It's $12.99. It's got loads of personality. This is a proper wine. And I'd also say about the packaging that it's really attractive, and then it's emphasizing its organic qualities on the label, which I think is really important. Can you tell us more about the winemakers? Well, Alto Landon, I've tasted through their wines before, but I really don't know an awful lot more about them, other than they're in Manchuela, and that I've always been impressed with the wines that they make, and they farm organically. So I've not visited them, so I can't fill you in more on that one. But I think this is a really cracking wine. And if you want to know more, Raymat is owned by Codogno, so that's a part of a big group, and I think that's and Jean Leon has said it's a winery set up by Jean Leon and owned by Torres now in Penedas. Karen says she's found Bobal too boozy in the past, but the alcohol's well integrated here. Yeah, it's right, isn't it? But I think when I've had Bobal, the ones I've liked in the past are like Juan Antonio Ponce, his wines, for instance, more a natural infusion style, just an amazing drinkability and freshness and lightness. And I think that's one exciting thing that's taking place in Spain, especially at the moment, is this movement away from high extraction and extractive regimes towards more, lighter style sort of reds with less of an extraction, more of an infusion approach. And I think it makes for wines that are and grapes that are picked earlier. I think that's made a huge difference. And I think so Hannah says it's a lighter style perhaps partly due to the amphora. Well, I think what the amphora does is it allows the fruit to express itself, and I think it also gives a textural quality to the wine. I find them really interesting. And Selena's put a link in for more information about Bodegas Alto Landon. So that's helpful. Right, let's move on to the next wine. I think that would be an appropriate point to move on. So this is Finca Constancia, and it's owned by González Baas, and I think that this is organically farmed, and the approach here from González Baas is to try and make wines that really have a more of a focus on fruit, more modern styled, less dependent on sort of oak aging to give character to the wine. And it's from Castilla-La Mancha, 100% Tempranillo. Let's give it a whirl. Where is it? And it's called Organic Moon Wine. So again, this is a wine that's making clear its organic credentials on the label, and the label itself is printed in this kind of special paper. It's called Façon Grape Touch. It's a wood-free paper made with 15% grape waste from winemaking and 85% forest certified pulp. So yeah, and this weighs in at 14% alcohol. It's organic, and it's so Vino de la Tierra de Castilla is the DO. Yeah, Kevin makes a good point that lots of consumers would no doubt roll their eyes at organic moon wine. Yeah, this is actually farmed biodynamically as well, which I think is why there's a reference to the moon. Yeah, put organic moon wine doesn't really translate into English that well. It looks a bit hippie-ish, and I guess there's a disconnect, I guess, between the wine, which is packaged in quite a modern sort of way, and that sort of hippie-ish connection to moon wine. Yeah, well, I think the wine itself is really quite interesting. It's got this spends 8 months in oak, and it's quite a sizable operation. 220 hectares. They began planting in 2001, and it's near Toledo. So for me personally, I like the directness of the fruit. It's focused and bright, raspberry, cherries, quite compact. It's nice acidity, appropriate structure. There is a bit of oak there. I find this sort of slightly kind of grippy, cedary edge that I don't know if is integrated totally perfectly with the fruit. That's the thing that sticks out for me as well. Yes, Pauline, 220 hectares biodynamically farmed. Yeah, it's a lot. That could be. I'm thinking which of the big biodynamically farmed estates? Well, I guess the McLaren Vale. My brain's gone completely blank. What's the one the Jackson family own in the McLaren Vale? Yangara. So Yangara, over 100 hectares biodynamic. I thought that was kind of the biggest biodynamically farmed estate in the world. So if they're going to farm all 220 hectares biodynamically, yes, this would take it, I guess, to be one of the largest, if not the largest, biodynamically farmed farm in sort of vineyard area in the world. But I suspect that not all of it is being farmed biodynamically. So this wine, I should point out that it's not an expensive wine, and this is for sale. The previous vintage, 2017, is for sale in Sainsbury's. It's currently on offer at £8.50. Normally it's at £10. So I think what's impressive is to produce a biodynamically farmed or not biodynamically certified, it's just organically certified wine that you can put in a supermarket at £8.50. It's quite impressive. So I totally forgive the slightly sticky, outy oak bit on the palate here. Love the fruit. And I think for that price, it's really fantastic. So yeah. And I guess the other thing I should say is that it's all very well for tiny domains being organic, you know, but that's not going to change the world. If the wine industry is to have its, you know, footprint reduced and it's to be more sustainable, then what we need big players to get in on the act and start farming truly sustainably. So when you see big operations producing wines that hit sort of price points that make them work in supermarkets and their farming world, that's really massive progress. And I know there's really a really big there's a few big cooperatives who are exclusively organic, and I think that's really important as well. So, any more comments on that wine before we move on to the next? The next wine, we're heading to Rioja, and it is Bodegas LAN, Extreme Ecological Organic Rioja Crianza 2017. So LAN is an interesting bodega. I visited LAN. They're big. They're owned by Sograp, Portuguese company, who also own Framingham in Marlborough, New Zealand. So Sograp have got some interesting projects around the world, and this is a special parcel. It's called Mantible Ecological Parcel, and it's within the Viña Lanciano vineyard. So obviously a lot of Rioja bodegas don't own all that many vineyards. Most of them rely on growers. Some of them have some vineyards of their own, and this is one of the vineyards that's actually owned by LAN. And it's 400 meters above sea level, and east-west aspect, and sandy loam and pebble soils. So in terms of vinification, no real surprises, other than it's some of the barrels, it says there in the technical information, are hybrid barrels with a mixture of French and American oak staves, which is kind of interesting. Oh no, it's American oak staves and French oak heads. That's right. I thought it'd be very strange if you could actually alternate the staves. It would be quite a difficult thing assembling the barrel, but they've got American oak staves, French oak heads. This is primarily new oak, I think, when this is fermented. Yeah, it's 14 months. And this one is in new French oak exclusively. So those hybrid barrels are for the other wines that LAN makes. Will be in the cellar. I'm impressed with this. Retail in the UK, I believe, is £17.99. So it's not hugely expensive, but it's not hugely cheap either. I think the fruit quality there is amazing. It's got lovely presence of fruit. Yes, this is Rioja, so oak comes into the mix here as well. And I think the new French oak is making its presence felt here. You're getting a bit of the vanilla and maybe a hint of coconut, which I generally associate more with American oak, but with new French oak, you still get some of those oak lactones that give those vanilla and coconut flavors. And there's this woody spiciness as well. But the main theme is this beautifully concentrated fruit. And I think this has got potential for development, certainly. Any views on this? Then we shall move to the next wine. Someone says lovely complexity of fruit. Definitely, yeah. Look, it's kind of primary at the moment. It's in a place where you really think it's probably going to show its best in a little while. Yes, could age well. Definitely could have. Yeah, it's quite impressive. I think that fruit quality. Do I know of any other producers using hybrid barrels? No, I've heard of this using different heads and stuff before, but I don't know of anyone else who's used them much. I don't know if they use them much here. It's just obviously if you pay a lot of attention to oak, and you've got, there'll be thousands of barrels in the cellar. I think with this region that the barrel is such an integral part of the wine style that people will be using all sorts of different ones. And someone says Baronia is using these hybrid barrels as well. Excellent. And John says he's tried the mixed oak wine from Lanciano and it's fascinating. Yep. And Argentina do it as well. Thank you, Lee. Great. So let's move on to the last wine. And this is the only one of the 6 wines that I selected that is not actually organically farmed. But what's interesting about this? Well, 2 things interesting. First of all, I think it's a cracking wine for the money. This is around £22, and it's a Gran Reserva Rioja from 2012, and it's really good, and it's a bonkersly cheap price, I think, for the quality on offer. But the second thing that's interesting is that Baronia have got a new winery that they use for their for some of their wines, well, quite a lot of their wines. And this is the first in Europe to get what's called LEED certification. This is something I've come across quite a bit in North America. It's a big thing there. It's this leader in energy efficiency and sustainable design. So this is about having a completely energy efficient winery. Say, for instance, you might be using geothermal. I think you use geothermal energy to heat it where they need to heat it. And this is a really important aspect of sustainability is getting the winery sustainable. A well-designed winery can have a massively lower impact than one that's more traditionally done, because there's a lot of energy that's used in making wine. So I think that this is kind of interesting. So let's taste it. And this is also quite widely available. I think Majestic have it among others. So the blend is 93% Tempranillo, 4% Gratiano, and 3%. It says 3% Tempranillo there, but I think they mean Mazuelo, so that will be 3% Mazuelo. And aromatically, this is fabulous. I mean, it's in a really beautiful place. And there's lots of aromas going on there, but Karen says oregano, yeah. But there's so many aromas, but they all seem to be working together and they're not fighting each other. And Kevin says that LEED's interesting because it's got a logo badge you can display with pride. Yeah, it's about this having a banner to gather under. I think it's really important. Well, I think organic has a badge. I think the thing that's difficult is sustainability. That's the real challenge, is communicating sustainability in a way that means anything at all and that isn't totally confusing. And John says nice dried fruits. Yeah, I think this is really just a benchmark Gran Reserva Rioja at a good price. I mean, it's beautifully aromatic. It's got great concentration. This freshness, yeah, 22. I believe the Majestic, their regular price is $23.99, but you get it like $21.99 and mixed 6 price. Really, it's just a truly wonderful wine. And Baronia, I think, are good at everything they do is pretty good, and the pricing is just bonkers good. So yeah, there we have it. If there are any more comments and questions, fire them in now. believe we have come to the end of our time, and thank you for joining and for tasting along, and thank you for all the contributions as well. Yeah. Yes, Heather says lovely unforced freshness. Kevin says that's fresh for 2012 Grand Reserva. Yeah, it really is. So yeah, thanks, and I hope that you found the wines, or at least some of them, interesting. And personally, I think that this whole area of sustainability is a really important one. It's important that we kind of have these conversations and think about ways to move forwards. Yeah. So just a shout out for Celine's said that the live tasting is 22nd and 23rd of June. Sorry, I said it was July earlier on. So that's hopefully going to be a really good event. So thank you, and hopefully see you all around at some other time.